This is the Mint on ZTN Prime, your sneak peek into the world of business, finance, and economies. We're coming to you from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. I'm Eben Mabunda. Let's get started. Now, coming up, President Emmerson Mnangagwa rallied African nations and global partners to urgently safeguard the continent's wetlands, calling for concrete action, not just policy discussions. He made the call during the official opening of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Contracting Parties to the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands COP15 underway in Victoria Falls. Wetlands cover just 6% of the Earth's surface but support 40% of global biodiversity and the livelihoods of 4 billion people. Yet nearly 50% of Africa's wetlands have been lost over the past 5 decades. As over 170 countries gather in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe for Ramsar COP15, only the second time the summit is held in Africa, the focus is on reversing this decline. We speak to Martin Harper, BirdLife International Chief Executive, right here on the Mint. Now, the Mint will be right back. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The Mint as we come to you from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Now we take a look at our stories in detail. Now, President Emmerson Mnangagwa has rallied African nations and global partners to urgently safeguard the continent's wetlands, calling for concrete action, not just policy discussions. He made the call during the official opening of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Contracting Parties to the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands COP15 underway in Victoria Falls. Zimbabwe officially assumed the presidency of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Contracting Parties to the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands COP15, taking over from the People's Republic of China. His address after witnessing the official handover of the presidency, President Emmerson Mnangagwa urged the world to act boldly and decisively to safeguard wetlands.
Wetlands are essential ecosystems and also provide critical services such as water purification, flood control, and carbon storage, among others.
The event was graced by high-ranking dignitaries from different countries, United Nations representatives, conservation bodies, and indigenous communities, underscoring the global significance of wetland preservation. President Mnangagwa warned that wetlands, among the most threatened ecosystems on Earth, are under pressure from urban development and climate change.
In spite of this, wetlands are among the most threatened inhabitants on Earth. They face challenges such as habitat loss and degradation due to urbanization and development, agricultural expansion, and climate change, leading to shifts in wetland distribution.
The president, who is also the SADC chairperson, praised the Ramsar Convention for mobilizing global support towards the conservation and wise use of wetlands. He stressed on the importance of involving local communities and educating future generations.
Now is the time for us to change our mindsets and start implementing multifaceted and collaborative approaches towards protecting our wetlands.
President Mnangagwa added that implementing sustainable land use and development practices is vital for protecting wetlands from the impacts of human activities.
Zimbabwe embarked on its journey in wetland conservation with a notable commitment to environmental stewardship by ratifying the Ramsar Convention on May 3rd, 2013. Since then, we have designated 7 Ramsar sites, highlighting our dedication to wetland conservation and preservation.
Ramsar Convention Secretary General Dr. Musonda Mumba echoed the call for urgent and collective action on wetlands preservation, praising Zimbabwe for hosting a timely and strategic meeting.
We cannot act alone. It is important that wetlands are at the center of biodiversity, migratory species, capitalizing on synergies across MEAs, investing in restoration, protection at scale, recognizing, supporting knowledge of indigenous peoples and also local communities, and lastly, empowering the next generation of young people to carry this work forward.
As conversations on wetlands preservation continue, Zimbabwean lawmakers have hinted on legislative efforts to enact a dedicated Wetland Act.
We are going to be pushing a bill around so that we have a Wetland Act. For us going into the future to have a separate and designated office, a separate directorate that will deal specifically with wetlands.
As deliberations continue, COP15 is expected to produce key resolutions on wetlands financing, climate resilience, and strengthening international cooperation. Well, of course, the official opening took place yesterday on Thursday with the president, of course, officially opening that particular event. Now, still to come on the Mint, we speak to Martin Harper, BirdLife International Chief Executive Officer, on the COP15 taking place in Victoria Falls. Now, the Mint will be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Didn't graduate. I guess I blew it.
You couldn't advise him anything. He would just look at you and say, so who do you think you are?
We were just like really spoilt.
And then they just give me the receipt and I'd pay.
The guy walks in one day and then he says that he wants to make a movie.
He was blowing the money.
There was just like this habit that he had where as soon as he got money, it was gone.
I just didn't have the skills or the experience.
This money, I could see it disappear so fast.
Harare, tune into the beat.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, your source for news, business, sports, fashion, and more.
Experience the pulse of Harare's culture and lifestyle.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, Harare's top radio station.
Join the conversation with Zimbabwe's top personalities.
Subscribe now for fresh and infotainment content daily.
Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's heartbeat.
Pandiroi, Bazu Matu Kuroya Hutayo.
Nanga ni makuna kuna okuwetera mukuba. Tuna kungoa kana kuona umbo hwe video okuwetera mukuba. Kana pasina then we talk of wakaita makuna kuna issue still pa someone.
Takuneza mudzimu wakuda kubuda pana mwana uyu. Munhu ya aripo futi akaiswa. Anonga achidini chivhara mudzimu usataura.
Zvakanditaura zvekucommittee vakachiwirirana kuti ndiri kuunze 75 iyo yakauya imwe 90 ndiri kuunza 25 kutaura kuswera mangwana.
Andina kunanga kwandakaenda, andina kumaprofita kwandakaenda, andina kunanga munhu uroyi. Ndakaenda kunobvunza bhozi mwana wangu ndiye akandiudza.
dental checkups, experiments, games,
The mixture is making bubbles and the bubbles have changed color. Our balloon has been filled by carbon dioxide.
We have it all right here on Happy Sprouts. Catch us exclusively on ZTN Prime, DSTV channel 294.
Learning has gone up and away on the ZTN Prime Kids block as we blast off into the world of science, language, mathematics, and many more.
There's a living dinosaur in the woods.
Get the crew together. Let's have an after-school homework party.
Your friends would think so too. Definitely. It would be nice if everyone could enjoy them. Aliens.
Unicorns. I wonder what the unicorns would wear.
Remember, learning is fun when you're tuned into ZTN Prime.
Boy Robo to the rescue!
The ZTN Prime Kids Vlog. Catch it Monday to Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. on DSTV channel 294. Get the picture?
Well, of course, you're watching The Mint as we come to you from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Now, wetlands cover just 6% of the Earth's surface, but support 40% of global biodiversity and livelihoods of 4 billion people. Yet, nearly 50% of Africa's wetlands have been lost over the past 5 decades. As over 170 countries gather in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe for Ramsar COP15, only the second time the summit is held in Africa, the focus is on reversing this decline. The conference presents a key moment to mobilize funding, strengthen partnerships, and integrate wetland protection into national climate and biodiversity policies. We are now joined virtually by Martin Harper, BirdLife International Chief Executive Officer. Hello, Martin. To start with, why are wetlands so crucial to both biodiversity and human livelihoods, and yet we still continue to see underappreciated conversations around this conversation globally?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the key reason in your introduction, which is the fact that the wetlands around the world are home to 40% of the world's biodiversity. But you're absolutely right. Sadly, we've lost more than 400 million hectares of wetlands since I was born in 1970. And indeed, wetlands, as we know, provide enormous benefits, not just for wildlife, but also to people, and they're central to our food and indeed our water security. They're important for disaster risk management and, of course, climate mitigation and adaptation. And all the services that wetlands provide to people has been calculated to be valued at something like $39 trillion. And so it is what the wetlands meeting here in Zimbabwe is trying to do is put more of a profile on the value of these wetlands and to encourage their investment.
Right. The 2025 Global Wetland Outlook paints what appears to be a bleak picture. 22% of global wetlands were lost since 1970. And when you look at Africa, which has lost over 50% of those, a big question is what's driving this particular decline, especially on the continent of Africa?
Yeah, so the biggest issues associated with habitat loss, degradation, and that's often to do with inappropriate land management, whether it's agriculture or forestry in the wrong place, or indeed when there's infrastructure which is causing harm to those wetlands. So if you put a dam in the wrong place, you put housing in the wrong place, if you have a polluting activity in the wrong place, then that's going to be devastating for the people who live around those wetlands, but of course also for the biodiversity that depend on them, and they call them their homes. So I think that what we are trying to do is for each of the 170 parties to the convention to try and embed the commitments from the Ramsar Convention into their national plans to try and take action for wetlands all around the world.
From your experience at BirdLife International, what are some of the proven methods of perhaps working at conservation of some of these wetlands?
Yes, so the BirdLife International Network is made up of 123 national partners in 119 countries. So we have an enormous amount of knowledge and experience to draw upon. So if I think about the Africa-Eurasian flyway, and we think in terms of flyways because we have birds in our name and birds migrate, if I think about what's been happening in places like the Tagus Estuary in Portugal, this is a site incredibly important for wildlife, and it's been protected, but sadly we had then to defend that site. And so the first message is that protecting those sites is much cheaper than the cure, i.e. the restoration of the sites. And so getting the sites protected in places like Tagus Estuary is important, but then also it's important to then restore them. And there's a site which our partner in Malawi has been talking about, the Chio Lagoon, which is something like 80 square kilometers, and it's in a big watershed. And the livelihoods around that lagoon have been diminishing from fisheries and from rice farming. And so the huge amount of effort has been put in place to try and restore that system. And then finally, some of our partners are actually trying to even recreate wetlands. So for example, from the country where I'm from, the United Kingdom, we have an enormous amount of habitat lost at the coast. So we've been doing some open habitat restoration programs on the coast, allowing seawater to come back in to create really important intertidal mudflats. So it's about protection, it's about good management and restoration, and it's about recreation of these wetlands around the world.
Right, now, Martin, less than 1% of the global GDP is directed toward conservation, and that's pretty much a concerning figure. In fact, 0.25% of the global GDP, to be specific. Just to highlight the aspect of funding and how funding remains very much of a concern. The question is, how can funding be unlocked towards conservation of these wetlands and, of course, protecting this very ecosystem? And what are some of the innovative means that could be employed to try and bridge that particular gap?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. There's an enormous biodiversity funding gap, estimated to be between $600 and $700 billion around the year. And of course, wetlands themselves need enormous investment over the next 10 years if they're going to meet some of the global ambitions that governments have signed up to. I think the first thing to say is that there are already commitments under the so-called Global Biodiversity Framework to try and actually halt and remove perverse subsidies which are being used to support particular industries which can cause harm to the environment. So the first thing today to do is to do less harm by removing those subsidies. But there's also a commitment from the governments around the world to mobilise an additional $200 billion by the end of this decade, and from all sources. That's a combination of domestic funds, which obviously can be raised through things like taxations, or providing incentives, or indeed there are these more innovative sources. And we had a session yesterday, a side event, where we heard stories from the Gabon, from Mexico, from East Asia, all about how we can mobilise both private capital, but also innovative sources such as carbon financing, which will help provide much needed innovative finance. Now, there's lots of great examples around the world, and what we're going to try and do is pull them in together and then showcase the best practice to all of the focal points in the Ramsar Convention. So we've got an enormous amount to do, but I'm heartened by the fact there are many great examples where people are mobilising new forms of finance to drive wetland restoration.
Right. You mentioned the aspect of examples. Let's look at an example here on the continent. BirdLife South Africa's success in securing no fishing zones for African penguins stands out. A big question is, what lessons can other African countries and the broader region draw from such localized victories, as it were?
Yeah, that was a fantastic example, and BirdLife South Africa deserve an enormous amount of praise for what they've done to try and protect the critically endangered African penguin. I mean, I think there are three critical issues. The first thing is to make sure you have the data in place to be able to determine whether a species or site needs to be protected. And then, of course, to try and make sure you have the legislative framework in place to protect and restore those sites or indeed those species. And then finally, you need a lot of persistence. And so what happened in the case of the African penguin was that the BirdLife South Africa were able to say that this is a critically endangered species, it's protected under South African law, but unfortunately, because of the fishing pressure in around the areas where the penguins were feeding, that was essentially reducing the availability of food for those penguins, which was affecting their survival. And so they made the case that those fisheries needed to be closed in order to provide the right food source for African penguins. And so, so it's about data, it's about laws, and of course, it's also about being really persistent because it takes time to win these cases.
I would then ask to say, how important is the element of partnership with local communities in speaking the language of conservation, given the fact that over 30% of course, the population in third world countries is pretty much found in the communal areas, the rural areas, as it were?
Yes, so all conservation has to be done with local communities. In fact, I don't know examples anywhere in the world where you have successful communities, successful conservation without active local community engagement. So I gave an example earlier of what our partner is doing in Malawi with Chia Lagoon, where they are working with the local community to try and find new ways where they can generate livelihoods, restore the fish and bird populations in the sites, which will benefit not just local communities through tourism, but also best practice examples of management, which will then ensure that that site has greater potential in the future for both the wildlife and, of course, crucially, the local community. So all of our partners within BirdLife, they are trusted by those local communities, and they can do things that sometimes government can't, which is to build those lasting, trusting relationships. And all of our conservation work is run with communities at their heart.
Ramsar COP15 is only the second to be held on the continent of Africa. Now, the question is, what are some of the key messages that BirdLife International is bringing into this very convention?
Yes, so the three main objectives that we're setting for this week is, firstly, the Ramsar Convention is trying to establish a new strategic plan to guide its work over the next 10 years. And we want to make sure that is adequately resourced and also has really clear binding targets to help countries deliver their commitments under Ramsar. Secondly, we want to encourage greater coordination and collaboration by the parties, particularly to help with flyway conservation, bird conservation. Of course, birds know no borders. They depend on all these wetlands wherever they go, and that requires coordinated action across each of the nations where the birds will be travelling. And finally, we really want to see a real commitment to collection of data to be able to underpin all of the amazing work that our partners and other organisations around the world do for wetland conservation. So they're the three main objectives. It's about a good plan, it's about greater coordination, and it's about underpinning that with really, really good data. And of course, the other objectives of this meeting is that you have a great opportunity to share experiences and best practice and learn, as we were discussing around financing. So I think getting 172 nations together can only be a good thing because most of the global challenges require global response. And so, that's the focus of our work this week.
Right. Speaking of the element of a global response, you mentioned also a key term, commitment. How important is the element of ensuring that the 172 nations and states that are here presented move toward incorporating the aspect of conservation of these wetlands into their national policies?
I think it's absolutely fundamental. So if a country comes to a meeting like this and agrees all sorts of resolutions and then does nothing back home, then of course that's not going to deliver on the objectives of the convention. And of course there are many other conventions which nations have signed up to, and we would really encourage them to make sure that the wetland conservation needs and the value of wetlands are embedded in some of the plans that nations are obliged to produce, such as their national strategies and biodiversity action plans, or indeed the nationally determined contributions that they're obliged to produce in response to the climate convention. So if we can encourage each of the governments to try and make sure they embed wetland conservation and the commitments on Ramsar into those national plans, then it is more likely that resources will flow to then deliver the objectives of the convention. And that's when I think we'll get wetlands in a better condition.
We spoke about the participation of the public sector. Now let's move on to the private sector as we round up. How important is it for private sector players to also move toward investing in the protection of these wetlands, especially given the aspect of the relevance of ESG reporting in recent years?
Yeah, so I think this is crucial. And if I'm honest, I think there ought to be more companies participating in Ramsar, because so many companies absolutely depend on water in order for them to run their business. And it's a really important dependency on their ability to raise profit. And I have to say, I don't think there's enough companies participating in the Ramsar Convention. However, under the Global Biodiversity Framework, there is now an encouragement, not a formal commitment, there is an encouragement for companies to do more to monitor, report and disclose the impact of their activities on the natural world. And so what we're seeing in different parts of the world, whether it's in Europe or in Japan, we're actually now getting formal regulations in, which is actually obliging companies to do that mandatory reporting of their impacts. Now that's a start. And the next step, of course, is then to set targets for how they can do more to create nature positive businesses. And we are working with them, businesses around the world, to try and help them on that journey. And some companies get it. They absolutely recognize the fact that the natural world is their key asset in order for them to be able to be profitable, and so they see them as an asset which they want to invest in. But other companies with long supply chains sometimes they do not have the visibility of the impacts of their business activities. So there's an enormous amount of work for companies to understand their impacts, set targets to improve, and then report on progress. And that will give them confidence, hopefully, to do more as part of this global effort for wetland restoration and conservation.
Harper, thank you for appearing on The Mint.
Thanks so much.
And of course, Martin Harper, BirdLife International Chief Executive, joining us right here from COP15 in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. And of course, that's a wrap on The Mint today. Do follow us on social media handles at Zimpapers TV Network as well as at ZTN Prime. Your views and your thoughts are important to us. Remember to catch us every weekday at 2 p.m. Central African Time for the juiciest business stories in Zimbabwe, on the continent as well as beyond. I'm Eben Mabunda, the Money Man. Let them do what they do. When we do what we do, we mean business. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.